Good morning. Welcome to Resi Boston 2017, and welcome to Medtech Angels Forum. My name is Wei Tao. I'm a member of Medtech Angels in Silicon Valley, and I will moderate this session. And along with me, I have four distinguished panelists: Laura, Henry, Harold, and Bob. And we have a lot of ground to cover today, and I want to start off, let each of the panelists introduce themselves as well as the group firm that they represent and associate, and then we're gonna look at the current investment environment for the medtech, and also we can address one of the questions probably a lot of will have interest in, which is what is a fit as far as entrepreneurs concerned, and in particular investors concerns. And we then gonna look into our crystal ball and look into the future a little bit. And finally, I'll leave some time, open the floor to questions. And let's get started. Laura?
So I'll start with Golden Seeds and then talk about my own background. So Golden Seeds is an angel group. We were started about 12 years ago in New York to address the inequity in funding of women entrepreneurs. At the time, women represented about 40% of founders, but got 3% of the capital. And we're largely relegated to healthcare delivery, education, and other traditionally female activities. So since then, we've grown. We now have offices in New York, Boston, Texas, Los Angeles, and Silicon Valley. We have about 375 members, and we're one of the largest angel groups in the country. And we just passed the $100 million investment milestone earlier this year. We invest across broad industries in the healthcare field, diagnostics, devices, health IT. I think we're probably not going to be investing more in drugs, but platform technologies that enable increased drug efficacy or delivery are definitely in our wheelhouse. So my background is I was an academic scientist for most of my life. I was a professor at Duke Medical Center and then Brandeis. I ran an active lab using genetics to understand basic cell functions. I joined Golden Seeds about 3 years ago, and not surprisingly quickly found a niche vetting life science deals. And I have to say, of all the things I've done in my life, this is one of the most intellectually interesting and enjoyable. And I feed off the enthusiasm and energy of the entrepreneurs. So.
Thank you. Henry?
So Henry Kay, and I'm a member of both Boston Harbor Angels and Sky Venture Group, which is a relatively new angel group here in the Boston area. Both invest fairly similarly. Boston Harbor has invested everything from kitty litter, disposal systems to space travel. Somebody had a rocket ship that got some investment. So it's pretty much area agnostic. It invests out of the local area as well, even though it's a local angel group. I know some tend to stay local where they can drive to. Although when you ask angels how many companies that they've invested in, do they actually visit? The answer is usually zero, unless they're on the board. So we've kind of, as long as there's somebody and we can reach them and we know where they are, but a lot is IT lately and healthcare. Not pharma though. The tendency is more devices, some diagnostics as well. Seems to be coming back again. Sky Ventures is all healthcare. It's relatively new. It's a mixed angel group because it has members from both angels and a lot of corporate sponsors who are coming to the group looking for new early stage technology to place bets down on. So that's a little bit different model. My background is pharmaceutical industry for years in research, regulatory affairs, then marketing. Moved to Boston Scientific. where I ran international marketing and then business development, strategic planning, which allowed me to kind of move out of corporate life and do the same thing that I love, to staying close, as Laura said, with the future, which is sitting out here. It keeps me young.
Yeah, maybe I go next. So Alpha Life Science is part of a German family office. We do our early stage life science investments through Alpha Life Science here in the US. We are just doing life science and healthcare, but within that, everything from biotech to diagnostics, even medical equipment is done one. Typically, what we try to do is we try to invest early on and then potentially participate in a Series A and get at certain points get actively involved. Based on my personal background, been CEO of 3 different life science companies in the last 10 years, and 10 years before been with big pharma, big medtech, Roche, Johnson & Johnson. So always had liked the entrepreneurial environment, and now totally focusing on working with entrepreneurs, getting groundbreaking new technologies off the ground.
Good morning, Bob Williams. I represent Life Science Angels Network. We're based out of New York. We're a small angel group, primarily founded by 2 physicians and several people who are active participants in the industry. We typically look at medical devices, although we have done a number of healthcare IT investments in recent years. We typically do about 1 to 2 investments a year. We do syndicate ourselves with other investment houses. We just closed out the first fund earlier this year. We have about 8 portfolio companies. We're putting together another fund to get some commitments for funding and look to go after some additional ventures. I also work for my own company, IB Matters, where I'm working with smaller companies in an advisory capacity. Typically, some of my activities are companies that are several years down the road, helping them find strategic partnerships, perhaps exits, and the like. Prior to that, I've been primarily in diagnostic imaging, interventional cardiology, interventional radiology businesses, much of my career in product development, marketing, and business development.
Thank you. Again, my name is Wei Tao. I come from Silicon Valley. Sand Hill Angels is the main group that I'm associated with. And like a lot of angel groups, we invest in a wide range of industries. Like Henry, we also invest in rockets. I think we passed the kitty litter though.
It actually had an exit.
Oh.
Not a large one, but it actually got sold to one of the big pet companies.
Congratulations.
Nice.
You never know.
I did not invest in it.
So as you can imagine, members, we have over 100 members mostly coming from high-tech industry of Silicon Valley, and a lot of them are interested in life sciences. So the 3 main focus areas are so-called consumer, enterprise, and then everything life science related. And the group's been around 17 years, started in 2000, and over the years, I think we've made about over 150 investments, and probably have 30 or 40 exits so far. And my personal background, I actually is a transplant in California. I was from Boston and moved there 3 years ago. I trained in biology and worked about 10 years in biotech industry in Boston area, mostly in genomics, and founded my own company afterwards. And then this is sort of my second life, if you will. I turned into an investor after I moved to Silicon Valley. I think this gives you a brief understanding where we come from and what we represent. And I'd like to invite panelists to talk about what their perceptions are about the current investing environment in medtech, and in particular, maybe also describe the investment process in your particular group or firm. Let's start with Harold.
Sure. Thanks, Wayne. I can look at the current medtech investment, early stage investment landscape through two different lenses. I mean, there's a reason why we took a vehicle into the US and away from Europe, because in Europe, basically, the medtech investment, medtech and diagnostics, early stage investment has dried out. There's actually no appetite whatsoever. And well, for the last, let's say, 10 years, that's been a trend. I mean, we did 3 European early stage medtech investments, and we always met the same people around the table. I mean, it's basically, I'd say it's 10 to 15 people, and the opportunities to invest in are only very few. So if I compare that to what for the last 10 years I've seen here in the United States, and where I spend most of my time now, it's a very different landscape. And especially in early stage, at least in my perception, and I'd like to also hear my fellow panelists here, how they view it, but I've seen somewhat of a renaissance going into medtech and diagnostics over the last years. And there's been some very promising technologies out there. So there's more appetite here to invest into medical device technologies. And I think that also creates a more fertile ground for new innovation. So I'm actually very positive about medtech investments going forward, and the few investments we've made so far seem to be doing well. We've had a few exits. So all in all, I'd say Europe wouldn't really bother reaching out to early stage investors if I were a medtech entrepreneur. Stay here, stay on the coast. I mean, East Coast or West Coast. There's a lot of interest.
Anyone have anything to add?
I would reiterate the sentiment. We've been in the angel investment since 2010, and that was pre-affordable care, and I think our primary investments were medical device. Once affordable care came around, there was somewhat of a little bit of a reluctance to put dollars moving into medical devices and more into healthcare IT. Basically, everybody was prognosticating the future as driving efficiencies of the enterprise versus the actual nuts and bolts of the day-to-day healthcare. I think we're coming over what I would say the precipice of the healthcare IT craze, and we are seeing more interest, more activity, both from an investment side and also some good companies and good ideas coming back from the device side in, I would say, the past 12 to 18 months.
All right.
So on the device side, I think early and innovative are the two key things. I think there's less interest now in 510K devices, and because the exits are actually quite long, and you're having to get well through and past FDA approval before exiting. Whereas PMA, de novo, 510K, early innovative companies are actually much more interested in exiting earlier. So I think that's part of where we're seeing increase in interest in devices.
And just to add, what I've seen, and I agree with devices coming back, but in the diagnostic space, if you go back for me about 5 years ago, if someone said diagnostics, everyone unanimously said no thank you. No, staying away from diagnostics. But lately, I've seen a lot of companies in the area of predictive outcomes. So I have a test. I can tell whether a drug is going to work on a patient or not. It's gotten very interesting. And now there is this company I'm working with that's able to, on a cellular basis, look at an R&D product very early and say, this is going to have toxicity. So you don't want to develop a product like that. You want to look for a different molecule. So I see diagnostics as becoming a hotter area over the next year or so.
So as far as, when an entrepreneur approach you guys to pitch an idea, how's that gonna go through the process in your group or firm to, as far as the decision-making process, how it's gonna be dealt with?
I feel like it's Boston Scientific, with Boston Harbor Angels. It's so many years that it's in the brain when you hear Boston. But so normally we go through a screening committee. It comes in either through a recommendation of a member, which is the best way to do it. If you can have a member come in and say, here's a company that I've met, I think has potential, that's a good start. There's a formal screening committee, one in IT, one in basically medical devices, the medical side, and then one in everything else. That's consumer products that we've invested in. Goes through a very formal screening process. There are about 20 members there. If it gets recommended, it'll come to a full meeting and do a presentation. Following that, there's kind of a sign-up sheet that's, yes, I'm interested in investing, observing, participating on the due diligence team, and more importantly, I have contacts that can help the entrepreneur. So even if we don't invest, we're providing a service to entrepreneurs. Then it goes through a pretty rigorous due diligence. I would say it's probably a 3-month process before checks start to come in. And Sky Ventures is fairly similar.
Harold?
Yeah, smaller group that makes quicker decision making. So basically, it's myself. So, but I'm also a bottleneck in it. I usually do the screening myself. So, what usually ends up being a promising investment for us is where, besides innovative, promising technology, there's a personal connection to the entrepreneur, either through introductions through my network or similar. And I'd say there are 3 criteria that need to be met. Definitely breakthrough technologies. We're not trying to do anything incremental. Personal chemistry with the entrepreneur, the ability to work with over the course of a longer period of time, staying involved. And ideally then, if you do follow-ons in the Series A, interested VCs or similar funds that we then tag along with. But then the process, I've taken investment decisions within like 5 days. And actually they exited positively. So, but it can take up to, it really depends. Everything from, I'd say, a week to 3 months.
Bob, do you guys follow more?
Yeah, I think we follow a process similar to Boston Harbor Angels, maybe not as regimented. Typically, most of the opportunities come by a way of association and introduction, although we do get plenty of outside pitch decks that come in. They go through a filtering process. Typically, those that bubble up to the top, we do put them in front of a screening committee. The screening committee is composed of business people, doctors, and members of the angel group that have a lot of experience. And typically, based on those, you'll pick 1 or 2 finalists. And I think a little bit in our situation, some of the investors or in the group are maybe don't have a biotech or medtech background. They're either family funds or looking to invest their wealth. So they sort of tag along with the general consensus of the professional component of the group who are also investors themselves. From a criteria standpoint, we typically like to see the team, I think, is first and foremost. We like to see people who have been in the business, typically who have had some level of success either developing or introducing a product and have been through the process. We put a lot of emphasis on that. We will look at futuristic breakthrough technologies, but in general we stick to what I would say is simpler, more pragmatic devices moving forward. We probably would like to be exiting in probably a 5 to 7 year time frame, and probably look at no more dilution after like an A round, and then hopefully they're either commercial on their own or being acquired.
So our process is very similar to Boston Harbor, so I won't go through it, but just a couple of differences. The first, not surprisingly, is that we require a woman to be in a position of significant influence and have significant equity. So usually that means at least one woman in the C-suite with probably about at least 10% equity. The other difference, I think, is while we get a lot of companies coming in through personal contact and also through conferences and pitch contests, we're very, very active in that ecosystem, as all of you are. But we also have something that I think is really unique, which is open office hours once a month, where entrepreneurs, and particularly young entrepreneurs, can come. They get an hour's seminar and starting with startup, and then they get a half an hour to meet with two people with relevant experience and just talk about their pitch, talk about whether they're ready. And we've had young entrepreneurs come back again and again until they have developed enough to be ready. And it's a really unique thing, and I think it's great. So I think other than that, it's very similar. We generally invest between $200,000 and $2 million. We often syndicate deals that are larger than that. Usually equity rounds. When I first came, it was almost all equity rounds, but in 3 years, we've now nobody bats an eye at convertible notes and even safe notes, although that's still more of a West Coast thing than an East Coast thing. We only invest in U.S. domiciled companies, and we need an addressable market, especially in Medtech, of about $1 billion at least. So that's where we are.
Yeah, so I'll talk about a little bit of the groups that I'm associated with. For Sandhill Angels, it's the process more or less similar to Boston Harbor's. We do pre-screening, screening, dinner meeting, and it runs on a monthly cycle. And we look at probably 50, 60 or so deals per month. And out of these, obviously after each gate, the number of candidates reduces. At the end, typically we invest 1, 2, or 3 companies every month. And one unique thing about our process is one of the members in the group has to, step up and be the so-called deal lead early on in the process to advocate for the company and lead the company through the screening process. So, reach out to the group and its members, get to know some of them, and hopefully, at least one of them sign on as your advocate. Is very, very important to sort of get you in the best position to get funding from Sandhill Angels. And I'm also associated with another group called Life Science Angels, different from Life Science Angels Network. It's also based in Silicon Valley. And that group is exclusively focused on life science related ventures, early stage ventures. And with that group membership, it is slightly different mix. Majority of the members are sort of veterans from the industry, and also membership is a little bit widely distributed in the different states, and also have some international members. And the process is a slight modification. It's like instead of monthly cycle, it's more or less runs on a quarterly basis, and I guess it has to do with because life science requires sort of domain knowledge to evaluate opportunities, and members just take a little bit more time to get to know the founders, get to know the technology, and do a little bit more deep diligence. And like all the angel groups, we do syndication deals because typically even a small deal, relatively small deal, it will serve us better, if we spread the wealth around a little bit. And also, besides the check, what we provide to our portfolio company are the industry expertise, connections, mentorship. When we lead the deal, we typically have a member, either at the board of director or a observer of the board. Even in deals we just syndicate, we not necessarily have a board seat. We still, provide whatever we can to help the company to succeed. And for the majority of the company that didn't go through the screening process, even though they didn't get our check right away, but we typically we give them feedbacks first of all, because that's very important. That helps companies tremendously as far as why they didn't make it this time around. And oftentimes they come back, after 6 months or 12 months. They, if they heed our advice, they trying to reach some of the milestones we laid out for them. They come back and ask for funding, and there are many success stories like that. So even if you get a no, don't give up. And I think we just talk about the investment process, and that kind of gets into our next topic, which is fit. Oftentimes, you as an entrepreneur, you approach an investor, they'll tell you, well, it's not a fit. That's the most common reasons why the entrepreneurs will get from an investor. So I just want to ask my panelists to elaborate a little more on what is a fit, and how should a entrepreneur get from a not fit to a fit.
So I can start if you'd like.
Sure.
So fit, at least from my experience in Boston Harbor Angels, starts with the CEO or the founder of the company. Over the years, we've seen CEOs come in kind of with a sense of arrogance, and you kind of listen to them, and they're just not coachable. They're young or old, but they have this concept and an idea, and they're not going to deviate from what they plan or what they think, and that's usually a very big red flag. Sometimes you lose, because we've had GoPro. They came in and they presented to one of our angel groups, and everyone looked at it and said, what is he talking about? Skiing with a helmet camera for his friends. Missed that one. But on balance, it's really, is there coachability that take the advice of the 80 or 90 people in the room that want to help? Aside from making money, they really want to help somebody young and kind of give back a little bit to the success we've had. And then it's the rest of the team that's there, but it starts with the CEO. The rest is on the technology. Is there a market? Is it overly competitive? How are they going to succeed? We kind of use almost like 4 questions that we've had. Does it work? Can you prove it? Will they believe you? So it's kind of, can the CEO lay out this vision of fit? Does it work? Can you prove it? Will they believe you? And that includes everybody, including payers, physicians in the case of life sciences, customers, and then can they execute and make money? So they can get through those 4 questions, there's a fit, because we can look at it and listen to what they're saying and add advice in the areas where we can.
You want to add something?
Yeah. So I just, the coachability thing is really, really important. And just to add, it shows up very, very early in the process in something as simple as going through your pitch deck, whether you respond. And I listen to my colleagues all day long talk about what they do and don't want to see. If I talk to you about what needs to go in your pitch deck and you come with exactly the same pitch deck at screening, it's an indication that you just are not going to be listening, and it means a lot about how you go about through life and how you're going to run that company, whether you're going to listen to what you're being told. I also really look in the team for not only really smart people, but a diversity of experience and expertise. And I like to see everybody doing their job in the company. I like to see scientists planning the science, even if it's all done through CROs. I want to see engineers building the prototypes, and I want to see people with experience doing the business end of things. And you'd be surprised how often that isn't actually what we see going on. And for me, it's also very important to see verifiable science. Publication in good journals is good. Non-dilutive funding through SPIR grants is also really good. And IP portfolio is we generally look for, depending on what it is we're funding. And as I said, strong clinical partnerships and an eye down the line towards and past FDA approval, because one important thing is FDA approval generally does not mean adoption. And so you really have to think about driving adoption, and it's not a marketing thing. It usually involves clinical trials that are not the same as the ones that the FDA requires. So.
Yeah, I would reiterate the sentiment of the co-panelists. I think one of the things that, as I indicated before, we look very carefully at the team. Again, from the experience standpoint, particularly in a heavily regulated environment, come with a device opportunity, which is mostly what we look at. It's really great to see either the leader of the company or the team having gone through that process. It's tough, and it's something that burns a lot of cash, but it can be a fruitful outcome. Again, the knowledge of their marketplace and how they can navigate that marketplace, and they should know who's going to pay for their product or service at the end, particularly in a complex reimbursement world that we live in, with the ever increasing complexity of the CMS reimbursement codes. These are all things that we look at carefully. Intellectual property. So these are the things that we look for fit. As a relatively small angel group, several of the members are physicians, so they look to almost take a little bit of a strategic mentoring approach to prospective companies that are being invested in. And again, the mentoring, the coachability are important things to help guide them along the process and have them have a successful outcome. And the only thing I would say in concluding is today's environment is a little bit different than I would say 10, 15 years ago, when the big companies were scoffing up all the small opportunities at a breakneck pace. There's been so much consolidation of the big companies that a lot of the smaller companies don't get picked up as quickly as they have in the past. They don't get the multiples they've done. So a company today, if you're going to go into the business, it's not to say you're not going to get an exit, but be prepared to be patient and be prepared to have your own commercial story and position moving forward until that day comes.
Harold, anything to add?
Yeah, well, on the coachability side of things, in my observation, it's a fine line. I mean, I've also met CEOs or management teams that were maybe too open to being coached and mentored, and that made me a little bit concerned, because I was like, well, I'm not gonna run the company for you. I mean, it's your company, and you should know something. So I think, and I've also seen, working with a few angel groups and similar institutions, that some might want to get too involved and get in the way of the CEOs, and that's only something where I think the social skills of the management team are really important. Where can they draw a line between being responsive and receptive, but then also being holding ground in what they want to do. So I think that's something I'm trying to test at least with the management teams and see where they are, and then from this angle.
And oftentimes we'll also hear, when a company approaches a group and the group will say, oh, well, it's too early. Well, it's too late. What is that?
Yeah, I maybe take the first shot at it. I think the moment you sign up for early stage investments, you can't expect a full-blown clinical trial already being completed. I mean, it's seed round, it's early stage, so you gotta know what you ask for if you go in early. I think, my experience at least, if it's just an idea, it might be too early. If there is some more flesh to the bone, it would be okay. If somebody comes with a full-blown clinical trial and asks for the first, whatever, 2 million seed investment, I'm getting curious how people got to that point. I mean, that's a different story then. But usually I'd say, if you do early stage, be prepared to do early stage. Don't ask for too much.
I would say we have quite a bit of difference in opinion, even within Golden Seeds. We
Sure.
have members who
Yeah.
really want to see a prototype, they want to see animal studies,
Mhm.
and then others in the camp that I'm in that feel like if we don't get in early with really strong entrepreneurs, they're not going to be there when we have all of those things. They're going to be way past us. And so I'd rather bet early on a team that is basically what you're talking about. And it's risky, but
Right. Yeah.
It's not uncommon that in the coaching and mentoring process, when entrepreneurs come in for investment, they're speaking to you on a regular basis, you're giving them feedback, they develop their concept, their pitch deck, and they're off going to other investors, and it's not uncommon to one day find, oh, we're with this other group now, thank you, but, it happens. So you do have to figure out when you want to jump in, but sometimes opportunities all of a sudden get hot and you lose out on them.
I think I'm in Laura's camp as well. I'm willing to balance my personal portfolio and take some risks that are really high, as long as they have a concept. As Harold said, if it's just an idea, flesh it out a little bit more, get something that can be evaluated, and then I'm willing to take a risk, even to a convertible note. If there's a nice discount, the interest is irrelevant because it's never going to be significant. But a nice discount, take some risk. As long as I can see how much more money is going to be required, then I'm willing to take a risk early. And it's a balance, though. There are others that are, I want to see clinical data, and it keeps a nice balanced portfolio.
I just want to add a little bit. This does not represent the opinion of the groups that I associate with. To me, the biggest requirement for me is whatever you do, you need to address a big enough market, answering a big enough question. And if you're doing that, I'm personally willing to give the company a little bit of leeway, be it just an idea, or as far as the founder requirements or intellectual property. If you're just trying to address a big enough market, and I can see a path forward has the potential, then I'm willing to take a little bit more risk than if you have a very defined area, very defined question, maybe limited market, then that's a different situation. We have 15 minutes left, and I do want to open the floor to let you guys ask some questions. But before we do that, I want to have each panelist maybe spend a couple minutes to look into the crystal ball and forecast a little bit, what will happen in the next 2-3 years. Let's start with Bob and what Dan is saying.
I do definitely see a trend moving back more towards the clinical end of the equation, Post-Affordable Care Act. Whether new healthcare legislation changes that or derails that, who knows? But I do think that there is a penchant from the investment community. I also think a lot of the larger companies or the bigger conglomerates, their product lines are, still making them a lot of money, but they're starting to get long in the tooth, and they're going to need new opportunities and ideas and products coming in. So I think the opportunity is right. Being from the diagnostic imaging space for many years, I think one of the things that we're hearing a lot of is artificial intelligence and machine learning. Typically that was called computer-aided diagnosis in radiology about 10 years ago. There are signs that that is truly being implemented commercially, typically in some of what I would say the image improvement algorithms, but they haven't made the breakthrough. Here's a diagnosis that you would have not normally had with that technology, or it picks up a biomarker that the human eye couldn't. That's the hope for the future. I think those will be long roads coming. And I also see it being spread out in other imaging technologies, particularly in the digital pathology market, as well as some of the video imaging technologies and endoscopy and the like. So I think there's going to be some pretty neat stuff coming about, and I think it's kind of like the IT part is now going in towards a little bit how to make the devices, let's say, a little bit smarter, add efficiencies. These are the areas where I think life will be interesting in the next decade, particularly in the medical device and imaging sector.
Anything to add, Harold?
Yeah. First of all, I think there is so much money to be invested that I would also not be surprised if one could see more VCs going earlier than what we've seen in the past. It's just there's capital to be deployed, and people are already willing to take more risks than they were willing to take risks, let's say 5 years ago, just to deploy the capital. In terms of themes, besides machine learning and AI, I would also say digital therapies is something that I've been looking at now for a couple of years. Also been actively involved in one of the companies out there. I think that's a space that VR, AR based therapies where there's a lot of untapped potential so far. And I would also agree that the clinical side of things is that I think we will see more of that, less purely pure efficiency plays, more efficacy plays, I'd say. And their hard clinical data will count, and there's a lot of unmet need.
Two things. One, the area of diagnostics that lead toward companion diagnostics. So where pharma companies have a product, here's a diagnostic that works perfectly with it, so you know it's going to work. The other area I've seen kind of a resurgence in, with all the mergers of big pharma, the amount they spend in research is gigantic, but I don't think it's any more productive than it was earlier. So there's still a need to pick up technology that's proven, make small bets in investment, and then make an acquisition and bring it in-house at much, much less cost, and it's proven. So they're willing to spend more dollars for technology they can either add in the bag if you've launched it, or finish the development much more efficiently than a startup, and then bring it in and commercialize it.
All right.
So I'm sort of thinking more on the science side of things. So one of in diagnostics, I think, and I think this is already happening, next-gen high throughput sequencing or deep sequencing diagnostics such as GRAIL type liquid biopsy things are looking amazingly good. I would not have thought that was the case, but I think the predictive value of some of those is quite amazing. And for me, predictive value is crucially important. We've had so many, mammography, PSA, all of these tests that have high sensitivity and really low specificity. And I think both healthcare cost-wise and morally, we really need to look for predictive value in these diagnostics. So in terms of AI, so we're generating huge amounts of data into databases for all of the elements, the genome, metabolome, kinome, tons and tons of information. So there's going to be two challenges there. One is to organize and curate those databases so that they're not a mess and they can be interrogated. And the other, and we have to decide whether they're going to be siloed in pharma and proprietary databases, or whether we're going to get our act together and have a national database for all of this information. But more importantly, what's I think going to happen is that integrated computational algorithms that can allow you to, those databases which are qualitatively completely different types of information that can allow you to go from one to the other. Because what we're seeing is that for diagnostics, if you can access those different pieces of information, it really increases the predictive value of diagnostics. So I know that's kind of general, but I think that's going to be something really interesting. And the other thing that hasn't been mentioned, which I think is really interesting, is the idea of 3D printing in biology. So printing cells and organs, and just, it's really, there's all sorts of things, even drug delivery that is possible. So.
Thank you. And I just want to add a little bit. I think, to me, the biggest win behind us is demographic. People are living longer, people are getting older, and they just need more medical care, and requires innovation to deal with a lot of problems associated with this historical, unprecedented demographic move. So if you are addressing problems associated with aging, living longer, people trying to live healthier longer, actually not just live longer, they want to live a productive life, then you are onto something. And the other thing associated with demographic shift is more abundant supply of capitals. I mean, people are getting richer, not only in the developed country, but also in developing country. I mean, more people getting into, the middle class, and people, I guess the higher end is moving even higher, and they have a demand to deploy their capital. And also for, as Thomas touched upon earlier, for the bigger companies, they need to broaden their product lines, and then one of the more efficient way to do it really is to acquire more innovative, smaller companies. So to me, future is bright, but you have to work hard to get there. Now I open the floor for questions. Please.
To connect the 2 points that you made about the demographics, especially with aging, and the need to address a quality life in the older to everyone. How much do you, as a scope, you guys think of the truly medical products, services, versus the ones that are just outside the home, that fill out the social day-to-day needs of people? Is that within the scope of investment, or do you really focus on a truly medical FDA path?
Does everyone get the question? Okay.
The only thing I can say is, I think I understand the question, but I think the past several investments we made have been more outpatient-oriented, wellness-oriented. Owlet Healthcare basically was a baby monitor, now will be a baby SpO2 monitor. It's almost an outpatient sort of semi-device going to becoming a device. But yeah, we look at that. Also, how to do more outside of the hospital infrastructure, because there's a completely different set of operating efficiencies.
And communication between outpatients and their physicians through digital, so probably the health IT thing, but sorting out, for me anyway, who is going to take market share in that world is very difficult. There's just so much out there right now.
We've done one more consumer play, but usually I would tend to invest in FDA-regulated, IP-protected technologies, because of exactly that reason. It's so hard to scope the market and understand the upside there, at least for me. I mean, I'm just not a consumer expert.
We've also done some in the consumer space. Patient out care has been an important area. It's not as well protected, but becomes a first mover opportunity. To be there and capture it.
I think we have time for one more question.
Sure, I had a question about medical device investors' role in combination products. Ms. Davis referred to 3D printing and cellular and organelles, but I mean, who's funding those combination products now? Is it the pharmas, or is it the medtech investors, or the biotech investors?
We have one which was a suppository applicator, which we then added a hydrocortisone suppository to it. So that was commercial, and we realized the real opportunity is in a combination product. So we're doing that, and some others for Crohn's disease and that general GI area. So that's probably the way to go into the future. It's a little more complicated because you don't know who's going to regulate it.
Yeah, I've done, yeah, not from an investment, but from a pure participation. I've done 2 combination products, and in both cases, they were primarily pharma-led.
Yeah, I'd say it's 2 answers to your question. Probably early on, I would focus on angels, because most likely they are less sector specific. And then later on, at least most of the combination products I've seen were more pharma VC type or pharma strategic investments.
If it's a 505(b)(2) drug, so you're not going out and doing all the tox, all the clinical, so the drug's established,
Right.
then it goes through get much more potential for investment that way. Which is what these ones.
That's a good one.
I think we are out of time, but the day just starts. I guess our panelists will hang around, and so if you have questions, feel free to approach them. Thank you very much, and thank you all my esteemed panelists.